World Sport, I'm Amanda Davis, and this is CNN.
I'm Laura Coates, and this is CNN Tonight. And frankly, our breaking news this hour is awful. We're still trying to find answers to what happened in Buffalo and get answers to questions in Uvalde. And now we've got another mass shooting in America tonight, this time in a medical building on the campus of the St. Francis Hospital in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We learned that at least 4 victims are dead. The shooter is also dead. Here is video from the early moments of the police response. Officers pulling out their long guns, and a woman watching the chaos said that when she saw emergency vehicles racing to the scene and the rifles being pulled out, she couldn't help but get emotional. Frankly, it's hard not to imagine or hard to even not be emotional from yet another mass shooting in this country. I'm going to talk to a city council member who says the shooter may have been looking for a specific doctor at that campus. And as we get you up to date on what happened in Tulsa this evening, we're not going to forget for one moment what's going on in Uvalde, Texas. How can we? And we're going to look at all the important questions that we're asking there tonight, later in this hour. But we cannot turn away from the reality that this is happening all across this country. Gun violence as an epidemic only seems to be growing. And tonight, it is throwing yet another American city into mourning. And right now, I want to bring in Captain Richard Muehlenberg of the Tulsa Police Department. Captain, thank you for joining me this evening. I have to tell you, it's really stunning that here we are again, and perhaps for many people, not stunning of the state of affairs we live in today, because no one believes it will happen in their town. And here it is in Tulsa. What is the latest? What do you know about what's happened here tonight?
So I appreciate the time you're taking with me tonight. I can tell you, things are slowing down here for us now. It's been just controlled chaos for a few hours for us. I can tell you we have 5 deceased. One of those deceased is going to be our shooter. We're still unpacking a lot of this information. It's absolutely tragic, but we responded to the scene and we found the shooter relatively quickly. I don't have a good count on the wounded right now, but we don't have anybody else that has a life-threatening injury. I can tell you this was an incredibly complex scene as it took place in a medical facility, basically a clinic, if you will, that's 5 stories, multiple floors. It's the kind of place you would go, to just visit with your doctor for a follow-up appointment. So it was just madness inside with hundreds of rooms and hundreds of people trying to get out of the building.
Captain, are you saying that there may have been other people, aside from the ones we know who have died, that have been shot this evening? Are there other wounded from this gunman?
So we have some other wounded, less than 10. We're just trying to figure. So right now, no one else has any life-threatening injuries. Some were wounded in just the chaos of trying to escape, and we are looking at some who are wounded by potential gunfire. But we're still figuring that out as people scattered and were carted off very quickly to this hospital and other hospitals with injuries. So we're digging into that, and we're going to have a more definitive number here later this evening.
In terms of where this took place within this campus, do we know anything about the floor this happened on? Was it on multiple floors? Was this shooter going from room to room? Do you know anything about the path that this person took?
So it was all contained to the 2nd floor of this medical facility that has 5 floors.
What's on that 2nd floor? What's on that floor, Captain? Is there a certain type of
I don't know precisely what they're on. There were medical staff there. I don't know what their specialty was, but it was, an outpatient-style facility for medical care.
And in terms of what we know, or do we know anything about the shooter? You say that the shooter may have died from a self-inflicted wound. Do you know anything about the shooter, the relative age of the person, anything about the motivation? Is this person known to authorities?
So we do have some preliminary information, which we're not ready to release at this time because there are other circumstances involved with this that are outside the hospital that we can't talk about right now. So we're still working with other agencies and other jurisdictions as this is related to a much bigger issue with this shooter. I know it sounds kind of, I can't really get into it too much. We don't believe that anybody else is in grave danger at this point, but this is more than isolated to this one facility.
So, of course, my ears are perking up at the notion of jurisdictions and a coordinated effort to try to understand what, and I certainly appreciate and don't want to compromise the investigation or the safety of people who were in the area. But suffice to say, you've got multiple people who are wounded, either in the chaos of leaving. This person, there's part of a larger orchestrated event to understand the investigation. In terms of what we know about the motive or the person, was there one person targeted, or was this, at this point in time, as far as you know, something that was unintended and just intended to cause mass casualties, but yet there was not one particular target?
So we've got some preliminary information at this time, but not enough to where we're comfortable releasing it. You know, we don't believe at this time that he was just targeting, you know, the entire hospital per se, but it's entirely possible that he was targeting at least this floor. He went to this floor with purpose.
And who responded? I mean, how did you know that there was an active shooter on the premises? Was it a 911 call? Was it somebody from within inside the building who was security for the hospital or the campus? How were you first alerted? I understand the entire thing took about 4 to 5 minutes. Walk me through how you were alerted to this happening.
It was very short. We received a phone call that there was a gentleman on campus with a rifle. Officers showed up. The call came in for us at 4:52 this afternoon. The call was dispatched to officers at 4:53, and our first officer arrived on scene at 4:56. So within 3 minutes, we arrived on scene. You know, looking for the suspect, we had heard shots being fired on the second floor. Officers, you know, ran up to the second floor, and as they were breaching the door in the stairway, which was at 5:01, so about 5 minutes into the situation, they were breaching that doorway and they heard the shooting stop. So in that type of situation is no longer what's considered an active shooter, where someone is, you know, actively just continuing to fire rounds as it stops. So in an active shooter situation, for us, we will continue to run and aggress where those shots are coming from. So it stopped, and as soon as it stopped, we got through that door and we found our first victim. So as we continued on, we found another victim and the suspect, who had apparently shot himself.
Have the victims yet been identified?
We know who they are, but we're still making notifications to the family at this time.
Do you know what the weapon that was used was?
He had a long gun, or a rifle, and a pistol.
And by the time you arrived, how were you aware that this was the shooter that was deceased? Was there some indication about his person?
When we found the shooter, he still had the rifle and the pistol on his person.
He was then dead, though, at that point in time.
Correct. Correct.
We're hearing news and some reports about a potential incident happening in Muskogee. What can you tell us about that? An area not too far from Tulsa.
I can't confirm that right now. We are looking into that. That may be part of this investigation, but it's too. There's too much going on with that to give you a comprehensive idea of how it's related. We do have investigators heading that direction right now to make contact with that department and with some individuals that are involved in this situation.
Captain, thank you so much for your time. Were any officers wounded in this?
We had no officers wounded in this. We have lots of officers on scene, and it's a horribly tragic event. Any life lost is horribly tragic. I'm very, very proud of the officers for getting there as quickly as they did, you know, very well potentially stopping more people from losing their life today.
Captain Richard Muhlenberg, thank you for your time and keeping us posted. I know there's a lot more to talk about, and thank you for giving us the transparency you have today. Right now, I want to bring in Jamie Fowler from the Tulsa City Council. Counselor, thank you for joining me tonight. You've just heard from the captain. What more can you tell us about what you might know about what happened on the scene? Do you have any idea as to who this shooter was or what caused this tragedy?
You know what, you know, from the accounts that I've been given, it's, you know, I can kind of reconcile from Captain Muhlenberg is that I was with an off-duty sergeant there in the division that responded to this, and we were getting the sergeant was getting real live phone calls and texts from officers on the way to the scene. And
What did you hear?
The first call we got was that, you know, there was an active shooter there at the Natalie Warren building there adjacent to the St. Francis Hospital. And then, you know, as we were sitting there, you know, the events unfolded. And I think our first confirmation is that we heard that there were 3 victims, and the shooter also took his own personal life. One person critically wounded, and from, you know, what we're finding out here, that particular person that was critically wounded has also passed away, for a total of 5 people.
There's an additional casualty now. So it's now, you believe it might be 6 people, including now
No,
the shooter? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, a total of 5. That's
Okay.
what I'm.
Total of
You know,
5.
that's what
I
I've
mean,
heard so far.
any life lost, obviously, is one too many. You know, Councilman, when you think about this, I mean, it's hard to look at this and view it in a vacuum. I mean, the nation has been talking about active shooters in the successive mass shootings we've seen just in recent weeks in this country. You never think it's going to happen in your community. What went through your mind as you're sitting in that car with that sergeant in real time? Are you thinking about what was going on other places and thinking, how can this be happening here?
We literally, you know, our nation saw what happened in Buffalo, and then also in Uvalde. And you know, if you're just here in the community, you would never think something like this would happen. And you know, our hearts and prayers go out to the victims and the families. And Tulsa is just one of the most normal, nicest cities in America. And you would never really think that something like this would happen. With that said, is that the sergeant I was with, the police department just yesterday practiced a hostage situation that now today just actually transpired. And I would imagine that police departments across the country are doing the same thing, that, you know, they are having dialogues and discussions and practice situations for just this incident. And it's just tragic. And the words just can't begin to describe the disappointment and the hurt.
The disappointment and the hurt, I think, is so well put. And, you know, as you articulated, the real sad reality here is that every city, every town impacted is nice, and no one believes it will happen here. And that's part of the scariest part for every person living across this country, that this tragedy could knock on all of our doors. And the idea that there was this training yesterday, I mean, you know, I've got kids who have active shooter training in their elementary school. Do you know if this training that took place yesterday was in reaction to the fact that there have been so many questions about what officers have done or failed to do in places like Uvalde? Was that in reaction, or was it a pre-scheduled? Do you know?
You know, you would hate to ever second guess what happened in Uvalde, but I would think that every police department of any size or scale has dialogues and discussions with everyone in their departments. And that police departments across the country, you know, have a dialogue and discussion and get prepared for just this situation. I think, you know, from what I'm hearing from reports coming in, is that our police department handled this situation really, really well.
Thank you, Tulsa City Councilor Jamie Fowler. And it's something that's just, it's stomach turning, frankly, to think about the idea of having to be continuously, perpetually prepared for a tragedy such as this. There's something to say about the state of our country. We're going to keep an eye on any developments from Tulsa. Rest assured, another night, another mass shooting in America, even as so many questions remain unanswered about last week's massacre. Coming up, we'll bring you CNN's exclusive interview with the embattled police chief who led the Uvalde shooting response. He's talking to our own Shimon Prokupecz. That's next.
we decided a few years ago to set out on a journey which we call Enable a Fossil-Free Living Within One Generation. And you can see all around Europe that the competitive situation is shifting away from fossil fuels and into renewables and into more nuclear power. So you can see that there's a lot of innovation going on around the fossil-free technologies. And you can also clearly see that the customer demand is shifting. And today, I think we can see that companies and customers are actually moving much faster than nations or global initiatives. So I think that this is a business strategy for us. It's not a sustainability strategy first and foremost. It's a business strategy and it is sustainable. But we can clearly see that through this transformation, we are actually getting increasingly competitive.
Business never sleeps. As the sun sets in Seoul and Shanghai, deals are signed in Dubai, and Europe is already in play. New York prepares to make its first move. I'm Julia Chatterley, journalist, global market analyst, and host of CNN's First Move. Join me in the financial capital of the world for a market-moving perspective on the news influencing global politics, culture, and finance. I'll speak to newsmakers, risk takers, and the ultimate game changers.
Bold moves, big deals, winning trades. It's all right here. Make CNN your first move.
First Move with Julia Chatterley. Today on CNN.
Heard it all before? But have you heard it like this?
The ultimate disruptor looks set to shake up our world. We really can't ignore the impact that this has. What can we do that explores a fresh angle? So let's untangle the players and political forces. The truth is a lot more complex. What's really going on?
Fast-paced news, in-depth reports, and fact checks from the perspective of The Global Brief with Bianca Nobilo. Tonight on CNN.
Out front tonight, a potential breakthrough in treating coronavirus.
We've gotten very little help from the federal government.
Could all this spending lead to a bigger economic crisis? One of our viewers saw you last night on the show. She says she's going to pay your rent this month. Shut up. I want to go now to an incredible story of survival. Would you do it all again in terms of being a nurse, knowing that that could put you at risk for this?
I want to help people more than I ever have.
Erin Burnett out front on CNN. It's a mystery that gripped the world.
If you have Madeleine, let her come home to her mummy, daddy, brother and sister.
A young girl's disappearance from a seaside resort.
Please give our little girl back.
15 years later, a major break.
Portuguese authorities have said that they have named a suspect.
CNN investigates.
So to be clear, the formal suspect is a convicted rapist and a known pedophile.
Missing Madeleine McCann, Saturday.
As we keep a close eye on the new developments coming out of Tulsa, we cannot forget the pain that's happening in Uvalde, frankly, across this country. Today, a 10-year-old child, Jose Manuel Flores Jr., had to be buried in a closed casket today. This just after 8 days after families had to provide DNA to even identify some of their loved ones. A loving couple was buried today as their 4 children are left with unanswered questions. And you know, the man that might be able to answer those questions, Chief Pete Arredondo, either he can't answer the questions or he won't. In fact, when CNN tracked down the school police chief after a week of silence on his part, one of the few answers that we got was, at best, we'll call it inconsistent. Now remember that Chief Arredondo was the incident commander who kept officers out in the hallway. This as a young girl called 911 repeatedly from the classroom, pleading for help. There's been no word from him since the day of the shooting, not for lack of effort on our part. This was all he had to say today after 8 days of changing stories and nationwide outrage.
I just want your reaction
to
the Director McGraw saying that you were responsible for the decision to go into that room. How do you explain yourself to the
We're going to be respectful to the family.
I understand that, but you have an opportunity to explain yourself to the parents.
And just so you know, we're going to do that eventually, obviously.
When?
And whenever this is done and let the families quit grieving, then we'll do that, obviously.
I'm sorry, did he just say that he'll give answers when the families quit grieving? Can you play that back? I want to hear that again.
Whenever this is done and let the families quit grieving, then we'll do that, obviously.
So, just out of curiosity, or to use his phrase, just so you know, when exactly does he think they'll be done grieving? And why, if respect for the families is the goal, why not have the respect to give them the answers right now? Some answers. I mean, both the district and the chief, they have a lot to account for. But don't let the chief say that he wasn't prepared for what may have happened last week, at least in training. I mean, we know that Arredondo took active shooter training not once, not twice, but 3 times, most recently in December of 2021. That's 32 hours of courses, and they didn't go in for over an hour? Now, look, we are right to question what went wrong in Uvalde. But it's not the only focus. I want to be clear that evaluating the police response does not mean that we shouldn't question our officials, our elected officials, on what else needs to be done. I mean, after all, while we've been questioning, there was another mass shooting today. And after all, it was an 18-year-old who went in with an AR-15 that he bought legally and used that weapon to murder human beings. Now, on Capitol Hill, bipartisan gun talks are in the early phases, we're being told. In fact, here's President Biden on the process.
Are you confident Congress will take action on gun legislation, sir?
I served in Congress for 36 years. I'm never confident. Totally. It depends. And I don't know. I've not been on the negotiations that are going on right now.
Well, that doesn't make me feel very confident at all. But what I am confident about is this. Lives are at risk. Right now, these lives have been lost. And the unpredictability of the date of these tragic events, when the next one may occur, it means that time is of the essence. And the collateral damage is immeasurable. And here to explore that collateral impact tonight is Chief Chris Vangeli, one of the first officers on the scene of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting in Connecticut. Also with us is Samantha Haviland, a survivor of the Columbine High School shooting with nearly a decade of experience as a school counselor. I'm so glad that you're both here with us today because I really want to focus and hone in on what people may not be thinking about. The idea of we know about the impact on what has happened to the families. We think we know. We'll never be able to truly understand. But Chief, when you think about this, I mean, walk me through a little bit about what your reaction has been now when you're thinking about the reaction by the officers, the statement that was made by that police chief to say, let's just wait to give information until the families quit grieving. I mean, what's going on in the meantime, from your experience, while families are waiting for answers?
Right. Once again, good evening, and thank you for having me on again. Before anything, I just want to say heartfelt prayers and thoughts go to the families, victims, teachers, and the whole community at Uvalde, and now, of course, in Tulsa, as we see another one right on the heels of the shooting down in Uvalde. You know, the parents go through a lot. You know, they want answers right away. And sometimes it's very difficult to get those answers because investigations can take a long time. The Sandy Hook report, the investigation took over a year to get done with. However, one of the great successes of Sandy Hook is that each family was offered and given a police officer as a liaison. It was their own personal police officer. That officer's job alone, day in and day out from the start until everything wrapped up, was to be with that family, to make sure that if any information came across The families had it first. To assist the families in navigating the investigation and the media, even to go get milk if the family needed somebody to go out shopping. So there are ways to really mitigate the families and what they're going through.
And I don't want to discount the experience of police officers who are responding to these scenes. I mean, the horror of what is being seen, the emotional reaction, it is haunting for really the rest of people's lives, and thinking about what they've come across and trying to grapple with it. And Samantha, I want to turn to you because you were a student at Columbine High School when the mass shooting occurred. And I understand that for years, you didn't even seek out therapy or counseling because you thought, hey, because I wasn't somebody who was actually injured, I had no right to do it. But the truth is, as you well know, that the collateral damage of the impact of these shootings is very wide-reaching.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I ignored my PTSD symptoms for more than a decade, knowing that other people had had it worse than I did, and I downplayed it. And I was a counselor when I finally sought help for my PTSD. So denying the symptoms and thinking other people had it worse is very common for survivors. But I want to call out, like, this stuff is hard for those present, those not present, for teachers everywhere, for parents everywhere, and it's in every community. And the more that we watch it, the more we see it, the worse it's going to get.
It's terrifying for so many. I mean, it's terrifying for everyone, myself included, to think about the feeling of helplessness and not knowing the predictability, although there is something eerily inevitable, and it's just something that's haunting. But I wonder, what do you make of what is the advice or the counsel that you believe is necessary? I mean, both of you, with the experiences you have, you've been on the ground, you've seen what happened, you understand the complexity and really the simplicity of the responses, what they should be. But walk me through a little bit, Samantha, in terms of what you see as missing in this conversation. What do you think people ought to be considering when they're thinking about a reaction to these mass shootings?
If I'm totally honest, I'm frustrated that we're always talking about the reaction and not the prevention. We react to these things, and I think a lot of schools and districts have a lot of practice, and we can lean heavily on each other on how to recover from these things. But why, as a society, are we waiting for it to happen in every single community before we decide to make some sort of response to prevent it?
I mean, the idea of this being something that we react to as opposed to being proactive. Chief, I want to end with you because, you and I were speaking about this, offline, and thinking about the notion of, and I asked you a question, I would love to hear your response. And that is, we've been talking a lot about the police reaction of what happened in Uvalde or didn't happen in Uvalde. You were one of the first people to respond on the scene at Sandy Hook Elementary School. And even having gone in, you grappled with, and other officers, about not even going in soon enough. Tell me about this idea of what happens and what's going through these officers' mind as they are under this magnifying glass. Is this something that is going to have an impact on not only morale, but the idea of how they are processing even their own roles?
Yeah, so at the same time that you're dealing with having witnessed, the deaths of multiple people in a horrific event that most of us will never see in our career, and then dealing with the acute stress disorder, which can turn into PTSD. On top of that, you have depression and you have guilt, and there's survivor's guilt. There's guilt for the people that were in the school that day and survived. There's guilt from the officers that were working that day that wanted to be there with their fellow officers, and there's guilt from all the officers, I think, that responded. You're always going to sit there and want to question and say, maybe there's something I could have done differently. Maybe if I got here sooner, maybe if I went down this hallway versus that hallway, maybe if I got to the ambulance quicker or the ambulance came up to meet us quicker. In the end, in our particular case, we realized that there was really nothing that we could do. We got there fast enough. We did our jobs. We got people that we thought we could save out of the building. But you still live with that. And you really have to get counseling. I did several years of counseling. I still go back every now and again. And it's important for each department to have a very, very good employee assistance program, an EAP. So when these events happen, trained professionals can come out to the police department and the other first responders and actually sit with them and deal with it right at the beginning when it's the most critical part.
And Samantha, it's the work that you do as well, the idea of having that available and recognizing the importance of these services. This is part of the conversation, and I'm a stone's throw away from the Capitol here in Washington, D.C. I bet they may be able to be proactive, even where we cannot. Chief Vangeli, Samantha Haviland, thank you both so much tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, a significant victory for Johnny Depp. After a graphic 6-week trial that captured the nation's attention, but jurors also found reason to side with his ex-wife, Amber Heard. We'll break down what the jury said about Depp's defamation case against Amber Heard and vice versa next.
コーヒーの持つ力って人と人をつなぐ力だと思ってて、うちの会社のビジョンっていうのは日本のコーヒーといえばフィロコフィアってなることなんですよ。からそれを達成するには世界に向けた通販が必要だったんですよね。
I'm Delia Gallagher in Rome, and this is CNN.
Afghan women are afraid that this is the beginning of your efforts to erase them from the workspace.
It's not clear. Even if we appear with the burqa, maybe they will say that women's voices are forbidden.
Did you ever imagine that you would be prevented from going to school?
Girls' education is fundamental to the dignity of Afghan life.
Do you believe that young girls will be allowed to go to school here in Afghanistan?
When you travel the world, make sure the world travels with you. Check in, log on, and get connected with all of the latest developments at your fingertips. CNN Partner Hotels. Connected to your world.
The world's biggest business stories in one place. Expert analysis from every corner of the globe. Marketplace, Africa, Asia, Europe, and Middle East. With CNNBusiness.com.
Once in a generation opportunity.
Technology, innovation, business.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
The Johnny Depp-Amber Heard defamation battle has finally come to an end. Today, jurors found that both stars were liable in some way for defaming the other, but they primarily sided with Johnny Depp, awarding him a total of $15 million in compensatory and punitive damages, although there might be some caps in terms of what they're actually able to extend. Now, while Heard was awarded $2 million, none of that was actually punitive. The jury sided with her on one of the 3 counts, finding that one of Depp's lawyers actually defamed her. The verdict caps a 7-week trial that was full of lurid details and drama that all started, of course, after Depp sued his ex-wife over a 2018 op-ed that identified her as a domestic abuse survivor. So how did jurors sort through the weeks of really dirty laundry and get to the heart of each case to reach this verdict? Joining me now is Ken Turkel, an attorney who specializes in these celebrity defamation cases. Well, Ken, here we are. We've been waiting for this moment to find out what the jury might actually find. First of all, were you surprised by the verdict in favor of Johnny Depp and also a liability for a statement by the attorney of Johnny Depp for Amber Heard?
I'm not sure anything could really have surprised me in this case. It was just not conventional in so many ways. Was I surprised? I never read much into the social media, into the buzz around these trials, because I've done them and I know what ultimately means nothing. All that means anything is what the jury thinks. What I guess would surprise me, these are very much zero-sum games, Laura. You don't really see compromise verdicts. You don't see a liability verdict with 50,000, 100,000. So the idea that there's an 8-figure verdict there doesn't surprise me, given the way the evidence came in and what it seemed like the vibe was in the courtroom. That part doesn't. What surprises me a little bit.
I do want to walk. I want to hear your answer to that, but I also want to walk through, because we got the word defamation on the screen right now, and you and I have talked about the fact that most of this trial did not follow the sort of flow chart one would go through when you're talking about a defamation trial. The idea of here's what you got to prove. So I want to walk through a little bit of the elements of what you had to prove in this case, because as you heard the jury's verdict being read, they marched through these questions and had to answer yes. And so walk me through in terms of what the take is. The idea of it, the question was it made, or a statement, was it made or published by Heard? Was it about Johnny Depp? Was it false? Was there a defamatory implication about Johnny Depp? Was there a defamatory implication by someone who saw it who was not Johnny Depp? And did they prove these things about actual malice? Walk me through in terms of how this was really the crux of what the jury had to look for.
And so some of these elements, as we talked about in one of the earlier appearances I had, this sounded more like a he said, she said, almost domestic violence, counter accusations. But it boils down to the statements made in this op-ed. And the statements were set forth in each part of the verdict form with the elements you just read. Now, when you look at these statements, one of the elements was a statement false, right, Laura? One of the things you have to prove is that it's capable of being proven false. It's a provably false statement. Now, when you look at some of these statements and things like, I incurred the wrath of a nation for standing up to a powerful man, et cetera, I am still questioning how that's provably false. And you really parse these statements out, divide them up, and you can literally split a sentence to figure out which part is true and provably false, et cetera. So as you go through these, obviously all the evidence of all the incidences that came in, the jury wasn't convinced that he ever acted with any sort of physical violence towards her. And therefore these statements that were implicitly directed at him were therefore false. The writer is considered a publisher under the law, as is the platform on which they publish. And so the things that jump out of my mind when you talk about defamation by implication, we're not saying true, false. We're saying in the totality, they've read this and this is what it's implying. So the jury instructions that led to these are going to be a lot more complex than these elements sound. And then you have all the First Amendment defenses. But
where does actual malice stand in? Oh, go ahead. Excuse me. What's takeaway to you?
Yeah, takeaway. They believed him, not her. The actual malice is even at a higher standard of proof, not preponderance of the evidence, but clear and convincing evidence. That is, she did it with knowing falsity. She knew it was false, or recklessly disregarded truth and falsity. That could follow from this story. They very much believed him. But then you have the counterclaim verdict.
You're right. And on that counterclaim, they did find that the attorney who was speaking on behalf of Johnny Depp, they found, did in fact defame Amber Heard on one of the statements that was made. And she was obviously awarded some damages there. But this is it was a really complex trial in the sense that they've strayed so far away from sort of the meat and potatoes of how you prove these cases of defamation. And so I'll be curious, as you are, I know, about what happens now and the impact. She certainly believes that the impact going forward will be a devastating one on women victims going forward and any victim of domestic violence. We'll talk more about the fallout and the repercussions from there. Ken Turkel, thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura.
We're turning back to Tulsa, and tonight's breaking news: 4 victims dead in a mass shooting at a hospital, on a hospital campus. And by one estimate, the 20th mass shooting in America since Uvalde. Not this year, the 20th since Uvalde. That was 8 days ago, America. What we know about the attack and the shooter, who is now dead, is next.
This is CNN.
Three Strands Global Foundation is a nonprofit that has been combating human trafficking for the last 12 years, focused in on 3 areas: prevention education, prevention through employment, and prevention through engagement. So we have a few initiatives that directly look at the root causes. One is prevention education, so that teachers can identify exploitation and trafficking, as well as be trauma-informed, and students in kindergarten all the way through 12th grade can be educated. When the pandemic hit, our prevention education program, Protect, we had to do a pivot. The kids no longer were in classrooms. Teachers were no longer in classrooms teaching. They had to make adjustments to be able to actually reach the kids online, which meant that they were looking in a different way with different eyes at their students as their students were learning this curriculum. We had to make sure that teachers still could identify any exploitation or abuse that was happening. Our second program is called the Employ Plus Empower program, and this is our prevention through employment. We want to make sure that survivors aren't re-exploited and that they have a sustainable job, that they are financially secure, and that they can thrive. Survivor voices are incredibly important in this movement, and I believe strongly that when we listen to survivors, we actually will create prevention programs and initiatives that do exactly what we need to do to prevent this crime.
In China, no wallet, no problem. Here, using an app on your phone to make purchases is an everyday practice. The industry so far has been dominated by private companies. That could soon change. China's new digital currency, known as the Yi-yuan, made headlines at the Winter Olympic Games, a centralized virtual form of currency that can be used just like money across the country.
I think the rollout at the Beijing Olympics is designed in some ways to show the flag internationally.
Other parts of the world have similar ambitions. The European Central Bank announced plans to create a digital version of the euro, aiming to achieve this milestone by 2026. The United States, the world's biggest economy, is currently in the research phase of its own digital dollar, but will not yet proceed, citing concerns around financial stability and privacy.
Try to be global and we try to be smart. And we try very hard to get both of those every week. But I want to hear our authentic voices of people who are passionate or intelligent about a subject, who will make you smarter, move you emotionally, who will kind of challenge your mind or move your heart. And that's the consistency that we try to get at.
Fareed Zakaria, GPS, Sundays on CNN.
Our breaking news this hour: at least 4 people dead in a mass shooting at a hospital campus in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The shooter is also dead. And police told me just moments ago that there are up to 10 people that are wounded. Joe Johns is also tracking the breaking news. Joe, what are you learning about what's going on in Tulsa?
Laura, there is still a lot of mystery surrounding all of this. First of all, as to those 10 people, it's not clear at all from speaking with the authorities, as you did just a little while ago, whether those people were shot or whether they were otherwise injured as a result of the chaos in trying to get out of that 5-store building when all of the shootings started this afternoon, heading into the evening. The shooter is dead. 4 other people are also dead. The shooter apparently took his own life. He walked in with a rifle and a handgun, ended up on the 2nd floor of that building where there's an orthopedic center, apparently shot himself as authorities were breaching their way into the room where the shooter was located. So there are some questions, of course, tonight about a corollary investigation extending to another location, but it's not clear at all what the connection is, and authorities have been very careful not to disclose any more than they know at this time. Back to you, Laura.
So much unfolding. Thank you so much, Joe Johns. We'll keep you posted, everyone, as we get the information here in the newsroom. Everyone, not even the escape of the Star Wars movie and TV franchise can let us completely escape the worst of humanity. But there is a swell of support tonight for an actress who's being targeted by racists. Where is the hate coming from, and why now? After 45 years of science fiction loved around the world? I'll tell you why next.
When Hublot smashed into the watch world in 2004, it really left a crater hole that has never quite seen the industry recover. This was such a bold, brash, and incredibly brazen take on watchmaking. The Big Bang was the product that launched this ship with a vengeance. These were big, brash, unapologetic watches with all kinds of riveted bezels and large dimensional pushes on the side. This was a watch that, again, was not steeped in tradition. It was creating an entirely new personality and boldness. All of this was brought to the brand by the new owner, Jean-Claude Biver, one of the most electric, energetic, and controversial figures in the watch industry. It's hard to think of any other watch brand that's had that much impact on such a conservative industry.
Afghan women are afraid that this is the beginning of your efforts to erase them from the workspace.
It's not clear. Even if we appear with the burqa, maybe they will say that women's voices are forbidden.
Did you ever imagine that you would be prevented from going to school?
Girls' education is fundamental to the dignity of Afghan life.
Do you believe that young girls will be allowed to go to school here in Afghanistan?
It's a mystery that gripped the world.
If you have Madeline, let her come home to her mummy, daddy, brother and sister.
A young girl's disappearance from a seaside resort.
Please give our little girl back.
15 years later, a major break.
Portuguese authorities have said that they have named a suspect.
CNN investigates.
So to be clear, the formal suspect is a convicted rapist and a known pedophile.
Missing Madeleine McCann, Saturday.
So the Force is coming together to defend one of its own. The official Star Wars page is posting messages in support of one of the actors who's been harassed by racist, what can we call them, fans? Moses Ingram just made her debut as Reva in the Disney Plus series Obi-Wan Kenobi. But she says she's received hundreds of racist messages on social media, calling her the N-word, even threatening her life. Fans, so to speak, of the franchise are so angry that Disney had the audacity to hire a black actress for a fantasy franchise. Executive producer and star Ewan McGregor is defending his young co-star.
Happening. We love Moses. And if you're sending her bullying messages, you're no Star Wars fan in my mind.
I also see those of you out there who put on a cape for me. And that really does mean the world to me because, you know, there's nothing anybody can do about this. There's nothing anybody can do to stop this hate. And so I question what my purpose is, and even being here in front of you saying that this is happening.
Entertainment Tonight host and CNN contributor Nichelle Turner joins me now. I got to tell you, Nichelle, first of all, hearing her talk about the idea of nothing you can do about this, I mean, it's just shocking to me. You're talking about Star Wars. We can believe in R2-D2 and Obi-Wan Kenobi and a baby Yoda and all of these different characters. But a black woman in Star Wars, that's the part where we can't suspend disbelief? What's your reaction?
Well, a lot of it is, I mean, you said shocking. I'm not sure that I'm shocked by it because it's also not the first time in this franchise that we've seen its fans show the worst side of themselves. But I do think it's just really sad and disheartening. And it breaks my heart to hear Moses talk about the fact that she questions her purpose. You know, and without hearing the entire bit of that, but because she is such a brilliant young actress and she is definitely a rising star in Hollywood, it really hurts me as a woman of color too, to hear another woman saying, I question my purpose and question what I'm doing because there's nothing that we can do about this. I do agree with her on one side. I mean, it's hard to police people's prejudices, right? It's hard to fix what is broken in the deepest part of people and makes the ugliest part come out. I do think, though, that I do commend Ewan McGregor for stepping up and speaking out. I think that it is also on all of us to be anti-racist and to take an active part into combating this type of hate. But we've seen it before, Laura. I mean, Kelly Marie Tran also was in the Star Wars franchise. And when they cast her, an Asian woman, she came, you know, up against a lot of hate herself. It drove her off social media. She wrote an op-ed about it, and she was saying, you know, it wasn't just the words of these people, it was that she started to believe them. And it tapped into all of those things she felt about herself as a little Vietnamese girl who felt like she belonged in the margins and not in the center. And so that, I think, is the toughest part of all of this, when you do hear how it really genuinely, viscerally affects these actresses and actors.
And John Boyega, another actor who dealt with this as well when he was a part of the franchise. I mean, and I remember when Billy D. Williams was a part of the franchise. I mean, the idea that this is not the first time you've had a person of color in these roles, but again, it's on the backdrop, not only, Nichelle, of the absurdity that we're talking about Star Wars, we're talking about aliens. The idea that a human being would be controversial, right? But you know, we're just on the heels. It's on the heels, Nichelle, of Escapism. I mean, people are looking to return to the movies. We were just talking yesterday.